every story is a journey, and my journey would not be complete without the care and sharing from everyone. Hopefully, through this story, we have found something for ourselves, whether it is a little inspiration, reflection, or simply joy. Now, let's start today's story. The soft hum of the morning sun slipping through the windows, the earthy scent of freshly tilled soil, and the gentle clink of silverware as Lana sat across from her father, these were the rhythms of life on the farm. It was a world she knew well, a world where the days were shaped by the seasons, the labor of their hands, and the love that flowed between her and her father, John. "Good morning, my little flower," John greeted, his voice warm and full of affection as he placed a plate of eggs and bacon in front of Lana. "Good morning, Dad," Lana replied, a smile playing on her lips, her eyes still heavy with sleep. The kitchen felt like the heart of their home, cozy and alive with memories, like a warm embrace after a long day. John sat down with her, a light chuckle escaping his lips as he reached for his coffee. "Your mother used to love these harvest mornings. She'd always say the best way to start a day was with a meal made from the earth itself." Anna's heart fluttered at the mention of her mother, who had passed away when she was just a little girl. There were times like these when the ache of missing her felt like a distant echo, soft but constant. But here at this table, with her father beside her, it felt like she had everything she could ever need. But fate, as it often does, had other plans. As the day progressed, Lana could hear the low rumble of the tractor outside, the familiar sound of her father working the land. The wind rustled the leaves of the tall trees, the scent of fresh earth filling the air. But that peaceful hum would soon turn into chaos. "Dad!" Lana's voice cracked, rising in panic as she sprinted outside, her feet heavy on the dirt. Her father had been thrown from the tractor, his body lying motionless on the ground. His face was pale, his breathing shallow. "Please, Dad, no!" Lana sobbed, her hands shaking as she cradled his head in her lap. "Be strong, my love," John whispered, his voice a fragile thread. "Your mother, she's calling me." The world seemed to stop, as if time itself was mourning alongside her. Her father's hand, once so strong, now fell limp in hers, and in that moment, Lana's life as she knew it shattered. The farm, their home, the safety of her father's love, all of it was slipping through her fingers, leaving her empty. The days that followed were a blur of grief and heartache. The farm that had once been alive with the sounds of their laughter and the rustling of animals now felt like a mausoleum. She held on to the memory of her father, his words echoing in her heart, but she knew that this place, her home, no longer felt like hers. After the funeral, Lana found herself at a crossroads. She could no longer bear the silence that clung to the house, nor the memories that threatened to drown her. It was then that Aunt Martha, her father's sister, offered her a new beginning in Savannah, a city that promised something different, something unknown. "Are you ready, dear?" Aunt Martha's voice was soft, full of compassion, but Lana could hear the undercurrent of concern. She had no answers for her aunt, no words to explain the storm swirling inside her. "Yes, Auntie, I think so," Lana replied, her voice barely above a whisper. She wasn't sure if she believed it, but it was the only answer she could give. The city was an alien place. It was noisy and fast, and Lana felt like a ghost in the bustling crowd. The transition was harder than she ever imagined. Every corner, every unfamiliar face felt like a reminder of what she had lost. There was no quiet farm to soothe her soul, no father to catch her when she fell. She struggled to find work, the job market in the city a relentless machine that seemed to spit her out at every turn. But then, as if by fate, a kind woman named Mrs. Beaumont saw something in her, She offered Lana a job at Dulce & Company, despite the resistance from Olivia, the company's headstrong manager. "Father, don't you think we should consider more qualified candidates?" Olivia's words were sharp, dismissive, but Mr. Dulce, the company owner, had a different view. "Let's give the young lady a chance," he said, his voice calm but firm, and Lana had no choice but to accept the opportunity, even though it was far from ideal. Working under Olivia's critical eye was difficult. Every day felt like a test, every mistake magnified. But Lana had learned, through her grief, how to endure. She poured herself into her work, each task a small escape from the life she had left behind. But nothing prepared her for what would come next. Ethan Campbell, a man with a presence that filled the room, walked into Dulce & Company one day and everything changed. He was everything Lana had been missing, charming, confident, and somehow, impossibly, he saw her. "You're new here, aren't you?" Ethan said, his gaze lingering on her. "I'm sure I would have remembered you." "Yes, I moved here recently from the countryside," Lana replied, her heart pounding in her chest. It was a moment of connection, a fleeting spark, but Olivia was quick to remind her of her place. "Lana, remember, our clients deserve special attention, especially someone like Ethan Campbell." But despite Olivia's warnings, Ethan's persistence was undeniable. His thoughtful gestures, his gifts, and his unwavering support slowly broke down the walls Lana had built around her heart. "I'm not trying to buy you," Ethan said one evening. "I just want to show you that I care." And in that moment, Lana believed him. "All right, Ethan," she said, her voice trembling with uncertainty. "Let's have dinner." Little did she know, her world was about to be upended once again. Lana stood at the window of the small apartment her Aunt Marta had arranged for her in Savannah, gazing out at the busy streets below. The city was a blur of motion, cars rushing by, people hurrying to their destinations, the honking of horns blending into the constant hum of urban life. But to Lana, it all felt so distant, so foreign. The city was alive, vibrant, but inside her there was nothing but a deep, yawning emptiness. The bright lights of the city flickered like stars, but they didn't shine for her. They only made her feel smaller, like a stranger lost in a world that wasn't hers. The bustling life outside her window, with its noise and energy, was a stark contrast to the quiet mornings she had known on the farm. There the air had been thick, with the scent of soil and the promise of another day's hard work. Now, here, the air felt heavy with the weight of her grief, the weight of everything she had lost. "Lana, you're gonna be fine here." Aunt Martha's voice broke through her reverie, her tone gentle yet firm, as though trying to pull Lana out of the fog that surrounded her. Lana turned to face her aunt, who was standing in the doorway, her hands folded neatly in front of her. "It's just so different," Lana whispered, her voice betraying the loneliness she couldn't hide. Aunt Martha gave a soft, understanding smile. "It's a new beginning, that's all. You've been through so much, but you're here now. You're safe." "Safe?" The words seemed to mock her. How could she be safe when her heart felt so torn, so broken? The memories of the farm, the laughter of her father, the warmth of the sun on her skin, the rustle of the leaves, still clung to her like a second skin. The smell of fresh hay and the sound of the tractor's engine. But now, even the memory of those things felt distant, like a dream she could barely reach. She moved slowly to the small kitchen, the rhythmic click of her heels on the wooden floor echoing in the silence. The apartment felt so sterile compared to the warmth of the farmhouse. The walls, pale and cold, seemed to close in on her. It was as if the space itself was suffocating her, reminding her that she was far away from everything that had ever been familiar. In the kitchen, she opened a cupboard and stared blankly at the contents. Unopened packages of pasta, canned goods, the bare essentials. She had no appetite. Her stomach twisted in knots, not from hunger, but from the hollow ache in her chest. She tried to focus on the task at hand, but her mind kept drifting back to the farm, back to her father's final words. She's calling me. The thought of him slipping away, leaving her alone in that silent, empty world, felt as raw now as it had the day he died. She hadn't been ready to let him go, hadn't been ready to face a world without him. But now, here she was, standing in a strange apartment, in a city that felt like 1,000 miles away from the life she had once known. Aunt Martha given her everything, a roof over her head, food, safety. But what could that mean when the world inside her was in shambles? The contrast between the warmth and comfort of Aunt Martha's home and the cold, unyielding pain inside her heart was so stark it felt like a wound that no amount of love could heal. She let out a long breath, the weight of the thought hanging heavy in the air. There was nothing here to replace what she had lost. Nothing could fill the space her father had left behind. It was all too much. And maybe it's just too soon. Lana's mind drifted, her thoughts spiraling through memories of her father. His hands, rough from years of labor, his voice deep and steady as he would hum old songs while working the fields. He had been the anchor in her life, the one constant that held her steady even when the winds of life blew fierce and unpredictable. And now, without him, she felt untethered, like a boat adrift in an endless, empty sea. "Lana, why don't you come out for a walk? It might do you some good." Aunt Martha's voice pulled her back into the present, her tone kind but persistent. Lana didn't respond immediately. The thought of stepping outside into the unfamiliar world of Savannah felt like an impossible task. She wanted to, needed to, but she was afraid. Afraid of the crowds, the noise, the feeling of being invisible in a world that seemed to move on without her. I don't think I'm ready," Lana murmured, her gaze dropping to the floor, her heart heavy. Aunt Martha sighed, but she didn't push. "Take your time, Lana. I know it's hard, but remember, you're not alone. You never will be as long as I'm here." Lana's throat tightened. The tears she had been holding back for so long threatened to spill. Her aunt's words, so simple and kind, somehow made her pain feel more unbearable. It wasn't that she didn't appreciate her aunt's kindness. She did. It was just that nothing could replace the love of a parent, the steady hand of a father guiding you through life. How do you move on from that? She didn't know the answer. All she knew was that for now, Savannah felt like a city too big, too loud, and too far from everything she had once known. The pain was still there, raw and unrelenting, and the city's fast pace only seemed to magnify the emptiness inside her. But she couldn't stay in the past forever, she knew that. The question was, how do you move forward when the weight of your memories drags you back? Lana turned away from the window and wiped her eyes, taking a slow, steady breath. Maybe tomorrow. Lana stepped off the subway and into the gleaming world of Dolce and Company, her heart pounding in her chest like a distant drumbeat. The city had been overwhelming in every way, but now she was standing on the threshold of something entirely new, something she had only dared to dream about in the quiet moments of despair. She pulled the hem of her blouse nervously, smoothing out the fabric as if it could somehow offer her the comfort she needed. Her uniform, a modest blouse and skirt, seemed inadequate in comparison to the polished luxury around her. The glass doors of Dolce and Company opened in front of her like an invitation, but one she wasn't sure she deserved to accept. Inside, the space was nothing like the old farmhouse she had known. The floor gleamed with polished marble, and the air was filled with the faint scent of expensive perfume mixed with freshly brewed coffee. The high ceilings arched overhead like the inside of a cathedral, and the silver accents on the walls reflected light in a way that made everything look even more pristine, more unattainable. She felt small here, a girl in clothes too simple, her shoes too worn for this world of glass and mirrors. Lana stood frozen for a moment at the entrance, taking in the immaculate decor, the pristine white counters and the rows of perfectly arranged display cases. This was a far cry from the farm, where the earth had been rough and untamed, where things were always in the process of growing, of becoming. Here, everything was already perfect, already established. She was the only one out of place. "Can I help you?" A voice interrupted her thoughts, sharp and insistent. Lana turned to find a tall woman with a stern expression, her lips painted a perfect shade of red. It was Olivia, of course, the one who had made it clear without a single word that she didn't think much of Lana's presence. I'm here for my first day?" Lana stammered, her voice faltering as she tried to project some sense of confidence she didn't feel. Olivia's eyes flickered over Lana's appearance, a barely concealed look of disapproval crossing her face, before she turned sharply, leading Lana toward the back office. The first few hours felt like a blur, an endless cycle of answering phones, directing clients, and standing in the shadows trying to blend into the glossy backdrop of wealth and refinement. Every time she looked around, she saw faces too polished, smiles too rehearsed. She felt herself shrinking further into the background, as if her presence was nothing more than a mistake someone would eventually correct. In the back of her mind, the memory of her father, of mornings spent with him on the farm, pressed against her like a silent ache. How was she supposed to fit into this world when she couldn't shake the image of him, his gruff hands, his deep laugh, the way he would call her his little flower, with a warmth that could melt the hardest of hearts? "Lana!" Olivia's voice cut through her thoughts, sharp and insistent. "Did you not hear me? I asked you to file these documents. They need to be done by this afternoon." Lana nodded quickly, feeling her face flush with heat. She hadn't meant to be so distracted. Her fingers trembled as she gathered the papers, the weight of their importance pressing against her chest. It wasn't just about the job. It was about surviving, proving to herself that she could stand tall in this world that seemed to demand perfection, even if she felt anything but perfect. As she sat at her desk, the walls around her seemed to close in, her thoughts swirling with anxiety. She was out of her element. Here, there was no comforting embrace of the sun on the fields, no steady rhythm of farm life to guide her. She was a stranger in a foreign land, trying to carve out a place where none seemed to exist. The sound of footsteps, the clicking of high heels on the polished floor, seemed to mock her every move. Every glance from Olivia felt like an evaluation, an unspoken judgment. It was clear she wasn't what they expected. Not refined, not polished, not good enough. Lana could feel the weight of that judgment, heavy in the air, like a dark cloud she couldn't escape. Her mind raced back to the farm again, to the way the earth had felt under her fingertips, the quiet peace of the land, and the simple joy of working beside her father. That world had been real, tangible. But this was a world of illusion. She was a square peg trying to fit into a round hole, and no matter how hard she tried, it felt impossible. But then, as she filed another stack of papers, something inside her stirred, a flicker of determination, a quiet defiance. "I have to prove myself." She hadn't come this far only to let her nerves swallow her whole. She had no choice but to push through, to show them that she belonged here, even if it was only for herself. She would prove to Olivia, to Dulcie, to everyone who had ever doubted her, that she was more than the farm girl they saw before them. With a deep breath, she lifted her chin, straightened her back, and set to work with a renewed focus. The city had its cold edges, its moments of indifference, but there was also a chance to start over, to prove that she could adapt, could survive. And for the first time in what felt like a lifetime, Lana felt the glimmer of hope. It wasn't much, but it was enough to make her keep going, one day at a time. And maybe this world isn't as cold as I thought. It had been just another day at Dulce & Company, another endless round of answering phone calls, organizing papers, and trying to stay out of Olivia's sharp gaze. But when the door to the main office opened and a figure stepped in, everything seemed to shift, as if the very air had changed. Lana looked up from her desk, her hands still trembling from the pile of paperwork she was trying to organize. Standing in the doorway was a man, tall, well-dressed, with an air of effortless confidence that made him seem both out of place and perfectly at home in this polished environment. His suit, dark and perfectly tailored, contrasted sharply with the simple blouse and skirt Lana wore. She couldn't help but feel a sudden rush of self-consciousness. Her attire, her very presence in this space felt inadequate compared to the man standing before her. The man smiled, and it was as if the room itself brightened. His gaze swept across the room, pausing on her for a fraction of a second. She quickly lowered her eyes, embarrassed by the attention, but the moment of connection left an unfamiliar warmth lingering on her skin. "Can I help you?" Olivia's voice cut through the moment, as always sharp and commanding. "I'm here to meet with Mr. Dulce," the man replied, his voice smooth and low, with a hint of amusement. There was something about him, something in his tone that made Lana's heart race in a way she couldn't explain. "Of course. Please follow me," Olivia said, gesturing toward the back office. But as the man moved toward Olivia, he paused, his gaze landing on Lana once more. It was a fleeting moment, a glance, but it sent a wave of heat rushing through her. She quickly averted her eyes, focusing on the papers in front of her, willing her heartbeat to slow. He cleared his throat gently, and then, to Lana's surprise, he turned back toward her. "You're new here, aren't you?" he asked, his voice surprisingly soft for a man so poised, so confident. His words were casual, but there was something in his eyes, an openness, a curiosity, that caught Lana off guard. Lana's mouth went dry as she looked up at him. "Yes, I moved here recently," she replied, trying to sound confident, though she could hear the nervous tremor in her voice. She wasn't used to this kind of attention, and certainly not from someone who carried himself with such effortless ease. "I'm Ethan Campbell," he said, offering a hand. "It's a pleasure to meet you." She hesitated for a moment before extending her own hand, shaking his briefly. His grip was firm but gentle, and the brief contact sent an unexpected flutter through her chest. "Lorna," she said simply, her voice barely above a whisper. There was an awkward pause, the tension between them thick but unspoken. Ethan studied her for a moment, his eyes searching hers with a hint of something unreadable. But before she could analyze it further, Olivia returned, breaking the moment. If you find it interesting, please give the channel a like to motivate us to make more new videos. If you find the story not interesting enough, please comment number 1 to help us improve the content. Sincerely, thank you. "Mr. Campbell, if you'll follow me," Olivia said, her voice professional and clipped. Ethan nodded, giving Lana one last look before he turned to follow Olivia to the back office. As he walked away, Lana felt an odd sense of emptiness, as though something had just slipped through her fingers without her even realizing it. For the rest of the day, the memory of their brief exchange lingered, filling her thoughts like an echo she couldn't shake. She found herself thinking of the way Ethan had looked at her, his gaze not just passing over her, but almost through her, as though he could see something more beneath her simple appearance. It was unsettling yet strangely comforting. Later that afternoon, as Lana wiped down the counters, she found herself replaying their conversation in her head. You're new here, aren't you?" The question had been so simple, but it felt charged with meaning. She couldn't figure out why, but it was as though Ethan had recognized something in her that she herself hadn't quite acknowledged yet. She glanced toward the door, half expecting him to reappear, but the room remained still. There was no sign of him. As the workday wound down, Lana's thoughts turned back to the farm. She had spent so many years there, building her life on the certainty of hard work and the steady presence of her father. Now, here in this fast-pacing city, she felt like a fish out of water, out of place, awkward, unnoticed. But then she thought of Ethan's smile. The glint of curiosity in his eyes and a tiny spark of hope flickered deep within her. Maybe she wasn't as invisible as she had thought. It was a fleeting thought, one that Lana quickly dismissed. After all, what was she to him? Just another face in the crowd, another person behind a desk, blending into the backdrop of the company. But the way he had looked at her, there was something there, something that told her maybe, just maybe, she wasn't as invisible as she had believed. Still, as the day drew to a close, she found herself questioning everything. The possibility of hope, of connection, seemed as distant as the life she had left behind on the farm. But in the pit of her stomach, there was an uncomfortable flutter, a stirring that refused to be ignored. What does it all mean? She wasn't sure yet, but one thing was certain. Ethan Campbell had left an impression on her, and it was one she couldn't easily forget. The days at Dulce and Company passed slowly, each one blending into the next with the rhythm of mundane tasks and fleeting moments. But there was one thing Lana could not shake. Ethan Campbell. He lingered in her thoughts, a quiet presence that seemed to fill the spaces between her breaths. Despite his absence from the office, she felt his gaze in the back of her mind, as if he were still watching her, waiting for something. It started with small gestures, an unexpected bouquet of wildflowers placed delicately on her desk one morning. No card, no explanation. Just the flowers, bright and untamed, like something from her father's garden, and with them, a message she couldn't quite interpret. Were they a sign of pity or something more? At first, she tried to ignore them, but she couldn't help herself. Each time she passed the bouquet, a flutter of something unfamiliar stirred within her. The flowers had a beauty in their simplicity, just as he did, a man whose presence was felt even in his absence. Then came the coffee, an iced caramel latte, just the way she liked it. No note this time, just the drink sitting on her desk as if it had always belonged there. Lana wondered how he knew. She had never mentioned her love for iced coffee, never uttered a word about the way she liked her drinks to anyone. Yet, there it was, waiting for her. "Don't make a habit of this," Olivia snapped one morning as she walked by, her voice filled with a sharpness that could slice through anything. "You'll get yourself into trouble, Anna." Lana didn't respond. She knew Olivia's tone, critical, judgmental. But even Olivia couldn't dim the quiet warmth that had taken root in Lana's chest. Ethan's gestures, small as they were, had a tenderness to them that made Lana feel seen, in a way she hadn't felt in a long time. It wasn't pity, it wasn't something fleeting, it was something genuine, something real. Days turned into weeks, and Ethan's small acts of kindness grew more frequent, more deliberate. Each time Lana returned from lunch, there would be a handwritten note on her desk. Sometimes it was a simple, "I hope your day is going well." Other times it was a quote about love or life, a little slice of poetry, dropped into her world like a gentle reminder that she wasn't alone. even in the crowded, sterile world of Dulcie and company. Lana's heart grew heavier with each note. She would sit at her desk, reading the words, her fingers brushing the paper, and she would wonder, why me? Why this quiet pursuit? One afternoon, as she was organizing files in the back office, she felt the familiar warmth of Ethan's gaze on her. She didn't have to look up to know he was standing at the door. She could feel it, like the sun pressing against her skin. The world seemed to pause for a moment, the air thick with the weight of unspoken words. "Lana!" His voice broke through the stillness, warm and inviting, yet somehow distant. He wasn't rushing, wasn't demanding. There was a calmness to his voice that told her he wasn't here to push her, just to be there. "How's your day going?" Lana's pulse quickened. She took a breath, trying to steady herself before turning to face him. It's going fine," she said, her voice softer than she intended. Her heart drummed against her ribs, and for a moment she was uncertain of what to say. The words felt trapped behind her teeth, and her stomach twisted with a mix of anxiety and hope. Ethan smiled, but it was the kind of smile that didn't quite reach his eyes. It was the smile of someone who was still holding something back, someone who knew how to control every word, every glance. But Lana saw the flicker of something in his expression, something more than polite curiosity. It was yearning, almost fragile, like a man who had been waiting patiently for her to see him, to understand him. "I've been thinking," Ethan began slowly, his hands slipping into his pockets as he leaned casually against the doorframe, "about the way people change. How they can be one thing and then—" He trailed off, looking at her with an intensity that made Lana feel both exposed and protected at the same time. Lana swallowed, unsure of where this conversation was going. "Change?" "Yes," Ethan said, his gaze holding hers. "I think I've changed. I think we all do, but sometimes the changes are quiet and noticed. The world keeps moving, and we're all too busy to stop and acknowledge the shifts inside us." There was something in his words that spoke directly to her, something about transformation, about feeling stuck in a world that expected perfection, but never seemed to see the person beneath the surface. "I think I've changed too," Lana said before she could stop herself. The words slipped out, raw and unrefined, but they felt true. She had changed. She wasn't the same girl who had stepped off that train into Savannah weeks ago. But how could she explain that? How could she explain how he made her feel more like herself than anyone else ever had? Ethan smiled again, and this time it was a little softer. "Maybe you have," he said, taking a step closer. "Maybe I'll be lucky enough to see who you've become." The silence stretched between them, thick with meaning. Neither of them spoke for a long moment, and yet the air was filled with unspoken words, words that hung in the space like an unplayed symphony. Lana could feel his presence beside her, not demanding, but quietly insistent. He wasn't rushing, he wasn't pushing, but the way he stood there, waiting for her to meet him, made her feel as though he was offering her something more than she could have ever expected. Her breath caught in her throat as their eyes met again. She wasn't sure what it meant or where it would go, but for the first time in a long while, Lana allowed herself to hope. Maybe this was the change she had been waiting for. The night of the engagement celebration was supposed to be the culmination of all her dreams. Lana had envisioned this moment for so long. Ethan by her side, the warmth of his hand in hers, the glint of excitement in his eyes as they stood together, a symbol of their shared future. She had imagined the grand ballroom, the sparkling chandeliers, and the laughter of their friends and family mingling with the soft strains of classical music. It was supposed to be the night when everything fell into place, when their love was confirmed by the cheers of the people who mattered most. But as the evening unfolded, Lana felt an unexpected heaviness settle into the pit of her stomach, like the air had thickened, turning from light and airy to thick with dread. She looked around the room, catching glimpses of well-dressed guests chatting, clinking glasses, and exchanging smiles. Ethan was by her side, his presence warm and reassuring. His hand, resting gently on her back, seemed to be the only thing grounding her in a world that was slowly starting to feel like a dream she couldn't wake from. "Lana, you look beautiful tonight," Ethan whispered in her ear, his voice a low, soothing melody that should have filled her with joy. But instead, it only deepened the unease that had started to rise within her. "Thank you," she replied, smiling at him, but her smile felt strained, forced. There was something in the way his gaze lingered on her, something she couldn't quite place. It wasn't just the usual adoration she had grown accustomed to. No, this time there was a certain distance in his eyes, a coolness that she couldn't ignore. As they mingled, Lana couldn't help but notice the way Ethan seemed to avoid making eye contact with certain people in the room. His interactions with Olivia were particularly distant, almost too formal. Lana dismissed the thought, attributing it to nerves. After all, tonight was supposed to be about celebrating them, about their future together. There was no reason to dwell on fleeting moments of awkwardness. The night wore on, the tension in the air growing thicker until it felt almost suffocating. As Lana and Ethan made their way to the center of the room for the toast, Olivia's voice rang out from the side. "Ladies and gentlemen, if I may have your attention, I'd like to say a few words." Lana turned to Ethan, who gave her a tight, reassuring smile, but his hand had slipped from her back, and she felt the absence of his warmth like a cold draft. Olivia stepped forward, her gaze sweeping over the crowd. "Tonight is a celebration," she began, her voice smooth and practiced. "A celebration of love, of unity, and of new beginnings. But we must also remember that not all unions are what they seem. Some, like Lana's, are born out of desperation. Desperation to fit in, to rise above one's station." The words hit Lana like a slap across the face, cold and sharp. Her breath caught in her throat, and the blood drained from her face. She glanced at Ethan, hoping for a sign, some reassurance, but instead, he stood there, silent, his face a mask of unreadable emotion. Lana felt her heart crumble. It was as though the entire room had turned against her. The laughter, the clinking glasses, the joyous chatter, everything around her spun into a blur of noise, and all she could hear were Olivia's words, cutting through the air like a blade. "Did you really think you could marry into this family?" Olivia continued, her voice dripping with disdain. "Did you honestly believe your humble origins would be overlooked? You are nothing more than a servant trying to sit at the table with royalty." The room went silent. Lana could feel the weight of everyone's eyes on her, the harsh judgment burning through her. She wanted to disappear. She wanted the earth to swallow her whole. Her chest tightened, her breath coming in shallow gasps. How had it come to this? How had she allowed herself to be so naive, to believe that this could be the happily ever after she had dreamed of? But the humiliation didn't stop there. As she looked around, she saw the smirks on the faces of Ethan's family, the quiet whispers between the guests, the judgment in their eyes. The whispers that had once been gentle now felt like daggers, each word more painful than the last. Her world, her dream, was crumbling before her, and there was nothing she could do to stop it. Then, to her horror, Ethan stepped back, distancing himself from her. "Lana, I'm sorry. I didn't know she was going to—" His voice faltered, but the damage was done. The words felt like a betrayal, a crushing blow to her soul. "You didn't know?" Lana's voice trembled with disbelief. The anger she had kept hidden for so long now bubbled to the surface. She had loved him, truly loved him, and now he was allowing her to be humiliated in front of everyone. The love she had thought they shared suddenly felt like a distant memory, something fragile and broken. Olivia's smile widened, as though she had just delivered the final blow, and Lana stood frozen, humiliated and broken. The tears she had fought so hard to hold back now streamed down her cheeks, and the last remnants of her dignity slipped away. It was in that moment, standing alone in the center of a room full of people who had turned their backs on her, that Lana knew everything she had believed in was a lie. Ethan wasn't the man she had thought him to be. The family she had hoped to join had only sought to bring her down. But as the laughter and whispers continued to swirl around her, something shifted within Lana. The shock of the moment, the bitterness of the betrayal, it all became fuel. This was not the end. No, it was just the beginning. She would rise. She would take back what was rightfully hers, and Ethan, Olivia, and the rest of them would learn the true cost of underestimating her. The spark of defiance in her chest began to glow, and with each passing second, her resolve grew stronger. She would not be broken by their cruelty, not this time. The night was far from over, but for Lana, it had already marked the start of a new chapter, one where she would no longer be a pawn in their game. Leaving Savannah was not an easy decision for Lana. The city had been a place of both dreams and betrayals, a place where she had tried to forge a future, only to be met with humiliation and heartbreak. And yet, as the train pulled away from the station, she felt the weight of the memories shift from unbearable to distant, like the fading glow of a sunset that once seemed to last forever. The city of her childhood, her loss, and her past seemed to shrink into a speck in her rearview mirror, but the pain, the scars, remained. New York was nothing like Savannah, where Savannah had been slow, rich with history and southern charm. New York was alive, chaotic, and relentless, a beast of steel and glass, ever moving, ever demanding. The streets hummed with activity, every corner brimming with possibilities, but also with a sharp, cold bite of indifference. People rushed past, their faces closed off, heads down, lost in their own worlds. In contrast to the warmth and familiarity of Savannah's small-town rhythms, New York's vastness seemed to swallow Lana whole. She had arrived with little more than the clothes on her back and a suitcase of hopes that felt heavier than its weight. The streets, filled with flashing lights and towering skyscrapers, seemed to mock her quiet despair. As she walked down the crowded sidewalks, she was just another face in the crowd, insignificant, unnoticed, and yet determined. She told herself that this was her fresh start, that in this ocean of people she could find something better, something more. But the cold wind, sharp and unforgiving, mirrored the gnawing feeling in her chest that things might never be the same again. The first few weeks were a blur of rejection letters, unanswered applications, and impersonal interviews that drained her spirit. New York didn't care about her past, her loss, or her dreams. It only cared about what she could offer now, in this moment. Lana woke up early every morning, determined, though tired, to face another day of the search. But despite her resolve, the weight of it all slowly wore on her. The dream of starting over felt more like a mirage than a reality. The promises of a new life turning to dust with every failed attempt. Yet the familiar pain of her past, of her father, of Ethan, of the betrayal, seemed to hold her hostage, as though it refused to let her go. The sound of her father's voice, the quiet rhythm of life on the farm, haunted her in the quiet moments. Would she ever escape the shadow of her past? But then came the glimmer of hope. One afternoon, as she scrolled through job listings, something caught her eye. An opening at Celestial Chocolates, a company she had admired from afar. It wasn't a glamorous position, but it was a job, and for now that was enough. She applied without hesitation, her heart pounding in her chest, praying for a break. Weeks later, when she got the call for an interview, she felt a flicker of something she hadn't felt in months: hope. But as she stood in front of the gleaming glass building, a wave of doubt crept in. She stood on the threshold of something new, something she had worked so hard for, but she couldn't shake the feeling that she was still a long way from where she wanted to be. Inside the building, everything was polished, sleek, and professional. The air smelled faintly of cocoa and sugar, a scent that, despite its sweetness, made her stomach churn with the weight of memories. The faces around her were all confident, all polished, all part of the world she didn't fully understand yet, and when she entered the office for her interview, the formality of the place only served to highlight the difference between her and the others. The manager, a woman with sharp features and a no-nonsense attitude, barely looked up from her notes as Lana spoke, almost as if she were just another name on a list. Yet, despite the tension in the room, despite the doubt that gnawed at her, something shifted inside of Lana. Maybe it was the resolve she had gained from her time in New York. Maybe it was the quiet defiance that had grown within her since leaving Savannah. But whatever it was, it drove her to give her best performance. She spoke with clarity, confidence, an aura of someone who had been broken, yes, but was no longer afraid to stand tall in the face of it. A few days later, the call came. She had gotten the job. Her first day at Celestial Chocolates was full of mixed emotions. She was grateful, yes, but also scared. This was her fresh start, but it felt like she was stepping into the unknown. The job was as a janitor, a humble position, one that made her feel invisible. But it was a start. With every sweep of the broom, every mop of the floor, she reminded herself that this was only temporary. This was only the beginning. But the loneliness remained. The vast city outside her window, so full of life, still felt like an empty void. She missed the quiet of the farm, the sound of her father's voice, the steady rhythm of her old life. And yet, she knew she couldn't go back. She wouldn't go back. As the days turned into weeks, the pain of her past began to fade, but it never fully disappeared. The ache in her heart, the longing for something familiar, stayed with her like a ghost. But Lana had learned something important. She had learned that she could endure, that she could rise from the ashes of her past and build something new. One day, as she was walking home from work, the scent of chocolate wafted through the air, reminding her of how far she had come. The familiar ache in her chest lingered, but so did the quiet sense of accomplishment, of knowing that she had made it this far. And for the first time in a long while, she allowed herself to feel proud. She was building a new life, step by step, brick by brick, and no matter how difficult it became, she wouldn't stop. In New York, Lana was learning that the past didn't have to define her. The future was still out there, waiting for her to take it, no matter how uncertain or daunting it might seem. And for the first time in a long time, that thought felt like a promise she was ready to keep. In the weeks that followed Lana's move to New York, a new and unexpected friendship began to take root in the quiet corners of her life. At first, she didn't know what to make of Henry. He had started as just another face at Celestial Chocolates, a janitor like herself, someone whose presence she barely noticed at first. But as the days passed, He became more than that. He became someone she could trust, someone whose words offered her solace when everything around her seemed uncertain. Henry wasn't like the others. His smile was kind, his presence always steady. When Lana first arrived at the company, her heart heavy with the weight of her past, she felt like an outsider, like she didn't belong. But Henry never treated her that way. He didn't look at her with the kind of judgment she had come to expect from others, particularly after the way she had been treated in Savannah. Instead, he saw her, truly saw her, and in doing so made her feel seen, even if only for a fleeting moment. "Don't worry, Lana," Henry would say, his voice calm and reassuring. "I'm here. We'll get through this, together." Each time he spoke those words, something inside her shifted. The tension that had become so familiar to her, the constant anxiety of not being enough, began to ease, if only just a little. His words weren't empty. They were sincere, laced with a quiet confidence that made her believe for the first time in a long while that maybe things could be okay. Despite her initial skepticism, Lana found herself opening up to him a little more each day. At first, she held back, afraid to let someone else in after everything that had happened. But Henry's patience was unshakable. He never pushed her to share, but he was always there, listening, watching, waiting, until she was ready. "I didn't think I could trust anyone anymore," Lana once confessed during one of their late-night shifts, her voice barely a whisper as she cleaned the counter. "But you make me feel safe. I don't know why, but I do." Henry looked up at her, his smile gentle but knowing. "You don't have to explain it," he said softly. "I get it. Sometimes the people who make us feel safe don't even know they're doing it. It's just the way it is." His words were simple, yet they resonated with Lana on a level she couldn't quite explain. There was no judgment in his voice, no pretense, just an understanding that went beyond the surface. He was someone who understood the weight of silence, the way pain could be carried in the spaces between words. As the days turned into weeks, Lana began to find comfort in their conversations. They would talk about everything, about her past, about his own experiences, and about the strange journey they were both on. It was through these quiet moments that Lana began to heal. She started to share things with Henry that she hadn't been able to admit to herself, let alone anyone else. "I didn't know how to move forward," Lana said one evening, her voice barely audible. "But now, I think maybe I'm learning how." Henry, never one for flashy displays of emotion, just nodded in understanding. "It's all about taking one step at a time, and sometimes that's enough." For Lana, that reassurance was like a lifeline. Henry's words weren't promises of instant transformation or grand changes. They were realistic, grounded in the reality of life's slow, often painful progress. And somehow, that made them more powerful. Over time, Lana began to see Henry in a new light. He was no longer just the man who swept the floors beside her. He had become a confidant, a steady force in her life. His humility, his quiet strength reminded her of everything she had lost, but also of everything she could still gain. Through him, she saw the possibility of rebuilding herself, of not being defined by her past mistakes, her failures, or her broken dreams. One afternoon, as they sat together in the break room, Lana caught herself watching him. There was something different about him now, something more than just the man who worked beside her. There was a warmth in his eyes, a depth to his words, that made him feel like someone she could lean on. She had come to rely on him in ways she hadn't realized until now. "Thank you," she said quietly, as they sat in the stillness. for everything. You've really helped me. More than you know." Henry's smile was soft but genuine. "You don't have to thank me, Lana. We all need someone to lean on sometimes. I'm just glad I could be that person for you." Lana wasn't sure when it had happened, when the skepticism and distrust had faded. But at that moment, sitting across from Henry, she realized that she had found something precious, a true friend. Not someone who expected anything in return, not someone who judged her for her past, but someone who simply was there, day after day, offering comfort in ways that went beyond words. Her friendship with Henry wasn't just a lifeline. It was a reminder that, despite everything she had been through, there were still good people in the world. People who could offer kindness without expecting anything in return, who could make her feel safe without any ulterior motive. And in that moment, Lana allowed herself to believe, just for a second, that maybe, just maybe, her past didn't have to define her future. Henry had shown her that there was hope beyond the pain, that the journey of healing wasn't about forgetting, but about finding new ways to live, despite the scars. It was a lesson she would carry with her, and as long as she had Henry by her side, she knew she could keep going. It was a quiet evening when Henry finally spoke the words that had been lingering between them for so long. The office was nearly empty, save for a few stragglers finishing up their work. The air was heavy with the scent of chocolate, a comforting, familiar smell that had become a part of Lana's life in the weeks since she'd started at Celestial Chocolates. But tonight, the atmosphere felt different, more intimate, as if the space between them had been filled with unspoken thoughts. Lana had been wiping down the counters when she felt his presence behind her. She turned to face him, startled by the stillness in the air. There was something in his eyes, something more than just the warmth she had grown used to. It was uncertainty, maybe even a little vulnerability, but there was also a quiet strength. Henry had always been the steady one, the one who never wavered, but tonight he seemed different. The usual calm of his demeanor was replaced by a nervous energy, a rawness that Lana wasn't used to seeing in him. I need to ask you something," Henry said, his voice steady but laced with an emotion that made her stomach tight. Lana hesitated, wiping her hands on her apron. She could feel the weight of his words pressing against her chest, the tension in the air thick and palpable. She didn't know what to expect, but she felt a knot form in her stomach. "What is it?" she asked, her voice softer than she intended, as if bracing herself for whatever was to come. Henry took a deep breath, his eyes never leaving hers. "Will you marry me?" The words hung in the air like a fragile thread, and for a moment, Lana's world seemed to stop. She blinked, stunned, as her mind raced to make sense of what he had just said. Her heart thudded loudly in her chest, the suddenness of his proposal crashing over her like a tidal wave. "Marry you?" she echoed, her voice barely a whisper. She felt as though she had been pulled into a world she wasn't ready for, a world that seemed both beautiful and terrifying at once. Henry's expression softened, and he stepped closer, his gaze filled with a quiet desperation. "I know this isn't perfect. I know it's not the fairy tale you might have imagined, and I'm sorry for that. But I want to give you something real, something steady. I want to build a future with you, Lana. I've never been more sure of anything in my life." Lana took a step back, her mind swirling with conflicting thoughts. The man she had come to trust, the one who had offered her comfort in the darkest moments of her life, was now asking her to take a leap into a future she wasn't sure she was ready for. The question wasn't whether she loved him. She did, in a way that she hadn't loved anyone in years. But the reality of it all, the weight of the commitment, felt overwhelming. I need time, Henry," Lana said, her voice trembling slightly. I don't know if I'm ready for this." Henry's eyes darkened for a brief moment, but then they softened again, and he reached out, taking her hands in his. His touch was warm, grounding. "Take all the time you need," he said quietly. "I'm not going anywhere. I'm not rushing you, Lana. I just need you to know that I'm here, no matter what." Lana could feel the sincerity in his words, the depth of his commitment. But it didn't erase the whirlwind of emotions crashing inside her. She had always believed in love, in the possibility of something beautiful, but now she was faced with the reality of it, the sacrifices, the compromises, the fear that maybe she wasn't enough to give him the future he deserved. The silence between them stretched on, and for the first time, Lana wasn't sure what to say. She wasn't sure of anything. Her past had taught her to protect herself, to guard her heart, but Henry's offer, his vulnerability, made her want to believe in something more. It made her want to take the risk, to let go of the fear that had held her back for so long. "I never wanted to hurt you," Henry added, his voice low and filled with regret. "I know I've kept things from you, things I should have said earlier, but please know that I've always had the best intentions. I've never wanted anything but to see you happy, Lana." Lana looked into his eyes, searching for any sign of doubt, but all she saw was the same man who had been by her side through everything, the man who had given her a reason to believe in kindness, in second chances, in the possibility of love after all the pain. He wasn't perfect, but neither was she. They both had their flaws, their scars, but maybe, just maybe, they could find something beautiful in the mess of it all. "Henry," Lana began, her voice shaking with the weight of everything she wanted to say, but before she could finish, Henry squeezed her hands, his eyes full of hope. "I'm not asking you to say yes tonight," he said gently. "I'm asking you to think about it, to consider it. I'm giving you the choice." Lana nodded slowly, her heart heavy but hopeful. She didn't know what the future held, but for the first time in a long while, she felt as though she had the power to decide. And that, in itself, felt like a new beginning. "I'll think about it," she said softly, her voice steady now. "I promise." Henry's face broke into a small smile, and for the first time in a long while, Lana felt a glimmer of peace. They had a long way to go, but whatever happened, she knew she wasn't alone anymore, not with Henry by her side. And that, in itself, was enough to make her believe that maybe, just maybe, love could be worth the risk. The days following Henry's death blurred into a haze of grief and silence. The pain was a constant companion, a weight that pressed against Lana's chest, making every breath feel like a struggle. She had never imagined that the world would feel so cold, so empty without him by her side. Henry had been her anchor, her steadfast support through every trial she had faced, and now, with his passing, it felt as though the very ground beneath her was shifting, uncertain and unstable. The quiet of the apartment that once echoed with the warmth of his presence was now stifling. His absence was a gaping hole in her life, a void that seemed impossible to fill. Lana moved through the days like a shadow, going through the motions of living without truly living. She would sit by the window, staring out at the bustling city, feeling as though she were disconnected from the world, separated by a thick, impenetrable glass. Her heart, once so full of hope and determination, now felt fractured, shattered by the loss of the one person who had ever truly understood her. But even in the darkest moments of her grief, something inside Lana began to stir. It was small at first, a faint spark buried deep within her, but it was there. It was the remnants of the strength she had fought so hard to cultivate, the same strength that had carried her through the chaos of her past. and though the pain of losing Henry was immense, the ember of resilience flickered to life within her, refusing to be extinguished. Lana knew that Henry would not want her to be consumed by grief, would not want her to remain locked in the darkness of her sorrow. He had always encouraged her to move forward, to chase her dreams, to believe in herself, even when she had felt unworthy of such faith. His love, his unwavering support had been the foundation upon which she had built herself, and she wasn't going to let that foundation crumble now. With each passing day, Lana began to rebuild. She started by returning to the work that had once given her purpose, though it felt strange at first. It was as if she had to relearn how to stand on her own 2 feet to navigate the world without Henry's guidance. But slowly, step by step, she began to regain her footing. She started taking on more responsibility at Celestial Chocolates, working late into the night, pouring all of her energy into her job. The work didn't erase the pain, but it gave her something to hold on to, something to focus her mind on when the weight of grief became too much to bear. The transformation within her was subtle but undeniable. Where once there had been doubt, now there was a quiet confidence that had begun to take root. Lana no longer saw herself as a victim of her circumstances, a woman who had been broken by loss and betrayal. She saw herself as a survivor, someone who had weathered the storm and come out the other side stronger. She no longer clung to the past with desperate hands, no longer allowed the shadows of her old life to define who she was. The future, once a terrifying unknown, now held promise. It was as if Henry's death, as painful and heart-wrenching as it had been, had opened the door to a new chapter in her life. But it wasn't just her work that changed. Lana began to find her voice in other areas of her life as well. She reached out to Ethan, who had been distant for so long, and for the first time they spoke honestly about the past, their mistakes, their regrets, and the possibility of moving forward together. It wasn't easy. Forgiveness never is. But there was a quiet understanding between them, an unspoken agreement that they would leave the past behind and work towards something better, something real. The same went for Olivia. What had once been a relationship defined by animosity and distrust slowly transformed. Lana, though scarred by the past, found it within herself to forgive Olivia. It wasn't because she thought Olivia deserved it. It was because Lana deserved peace. Forgiveness became a way for her to let go of the anger that had weighed so heavily on her heart, a way for her to reclaim her power. As time passed, Lana's rise was nothing short of remarkable. She was no longer the woman who had once cowered in the shadows of her past, afraid to take up space in a world that had been so cruel. Now, she was a force to be reckoned with. She held her head high as she walked through the doors of Celestial Chocolates, no longer the timid janitor, but a woman in charge of her own destiny. Her success wasn't just in the job she held, though. It was in the way she carried herself, the way she no longer apologized for her presence in the world. She had learned that she could be strong, not despite her pain, but because of it. The pain had shaped her, had made her into the woman she had always been capable of becoming, and now she stood tall, unapologetically herself. The days of silent grief had given way to a new reality, one where Lana was no longer defined by the tragedies of her past, but by her ability to rise above them. She had found herself in the ashes of her sorrow, and from those ashes she had built something beautiful. Henry had given her more than love. He had given her the courage to live, to thrive, even in the face of loss. And as Lana stood at the helm of her new life, she knew that he would always be with her. His love, his strength, his unwavering belief in her carried with her into every new chapter. Lana had risen, and this was only the beginning. The wheels of Lana's car hummed along the road as Savannah came into view, a place that had once held so much promise and so much pain. The city she had left behind, the city that had rejected her, now seemed to stand before her as if kneeling in submission, acknowledging the woman she had become. The skyline with its old brick buildings and moss-covered trees was the same as it had been when she left, but everything else had changed, and so had she. As she approached her childhood home, memories began to flood her, each one sharp and vivid like a flash of light. She remembered the way the streets felt beneath her feet, the laughter of her father, the way people would glance at her with disdain, as though her presence were an offense. Savannah had been a place of sorrow, a place of rejection, and as she drove through its familiar streets, she could feel the city's silent judgment still lingering like a shadow that never quite faded. But now, as the trees lined the roads and the familiar old houses passed by, she felt a shift inside her. She wasn't the same girl who had once walked these streets. She was different, stronger, more determined, and no longer afraid to face what she had left behind. Lana parked in front of the old house where she had spent so many years, where her father's memory still clung to the walls like an echo. As she stepped out of the car, the cool breeze touched her skin. But it felt different now. It was as though the very air had changed, responding to the transformation that had taken place within her. This is my city now, she thought to herself. Savannah may have turned its back on me, but today it's me who gets to decide what happens next. The heavy door creaked as she entered the house, the familiar scent of old wood and dust filling the air. It felt like a lifetime ago that she had lived here, but the walls whispered the past to her, reminding her of every pain and every moment of heartbreak she had endured. But those memories, once sharp and painful, now seemed distant, like old scars on a body that had healed. She walked through the house with purpose, her footsteps echoing in the silence. Every room she entered held its own history, memories of a girl who had been broken and who had, over time, found a way to mend herself. Her thoughts shifted to Ethan and Olivia. They had never truly understood her, never seen her for who she was. Olivia, with her sharp tongue and cold gaze, had been the embodiment of everything Lana had once feared. Ethan had been no better. He had chosen family over love, power over truth, and had let her fall from grace without lifting a finger. But as Lana stood in the place where she had once felt so small, so insignificant, she realized something. She was no longer that girl. She had no need for their approval, no need for their validation. She was here to reclaim her life, to reclaim her place in a world that had once rejected her. It wasn't long before she found herself standing outside the grand mansion where the Campbells had lived, the house that had symbolized the betrayal she had suffered. The gates were still high, the walls still imposing, but Lana's heart no longer raced with fear. This time, she was different. She wasn't here to beg or to apologize. She was here to take control of her own story. Her thoughts turned to Olivia and the coldness she had shown her. Lana had never asked for Olivia's approval, but she had once wanted it. Now, she realized that approval meant nothing. It was power that mattered. It was respect that mattered. And she would have both, no matter the cost. Standing in front of the gates, Lana could almost feel the presence of Olivia, watching from behind the walls, perhaps waiting for the girl she had once known to walk back in, broken and apologetic. But Lana wasn't that girl anymore. She was stronger than the city that had rejected her, stronger than the people who had used her. A moment of quiet resolve passed through her. She didn't need to make grand gestures. She didn't need to seek revenge. What she had earned through her pain and sacrifice was something far more valuable: independence, strength, and a life she controlled. And no one, least of all Olivia, could take that away from her. Lana's phone buzzed in her pocket, pulling her from her thoughts. It was an email from Celestial Chocolates, confirming her promotion. It was official now. She had risen not just above the past, but into a future that was hers to shape. The road ahead was still unclear, and though she knew there would be challenges, there was a calm in her heart now. She had learned to forgive herself, to let go of the pain that had once ruled her life. But she was also prepared to face anyone who would try to stand in her way. She looked up at the mansion one last time, a quiet smile curling on her lips. Savannah had once turned its back on her, but it was no longer the same. And neither was she. This is my time now. The soft rustle of the leaves in the warm savanna breeze filled the silence between them. Lana stood there, her heart pounding in her chest as Ethan approached her, his eyes filled with a mixture of pain and longing. She hadn't seen him in years, and yet, the moment she laid eyes on him, everything came rushing back. The memories, the love, the betrayal. She wasn't sure if she was ready to confront all of it, but there he was, standing in front of her, looking at her as if she were the only person in the world. Lana! Ethan said her name softly, as though he had been waiting for this moment for a long time. His voice was low, heavy with regret, and it made her stomach churn. I never thought I'd have the chance to see you again. Lana took a step back, her thoughts a whirlwind of emotions. How could he stand there with such calm, knowing what he had done to her? The years of silence, the lies, the betrayal, how could it all be wiped away with just a few words? You never thought? Lana's voice was sharp, cutting through the thick air between them. You never thought? You let me go, Ethan. You turned your back on me when I needed you the most. You didn't even give me a chance to say goodbye. Ethan flinched, as if her words had physically struck him. His eyes dropped to the ground, and he took a deep breath before looking back at her, his gaze filled with sorrow. I was wrong, Lana. I know that now. I should have fought for you. I should have told you the truth instead of letting you slip away. For a moment, Lana stood frozen, her mind a storm of conflicting emotions. The anger she had harbored for so long welled up inside her, yet beneath it there was something else. A flicker of the love that had never truly faded, a love that had once consumed her completely. She had buried that part of herself for years, afraid of the pain it would cause, but now, standing face to face with Ethan, it threatened to overwhelm her. She wanted to scream, to push him away, to make him feel the pain she had endured, but instead she found herself trembling, torn between the memories of their love and the bitter reality of what he had done. I wanted to hate you, she whispered, her voice shaking. I wanted to let you go, to forget everything we had, but I couldn't. I still can't. Ethan took a cautious step forward, his hand reaching out as if to bridge the distance between them. Lana, please, he said, his voice raw with emotion. I was a coward. I thought I was doing the right thing by staying away, by letting you go so you could have a better life without me. But I see now how wrong I was. I see now that the only thing that mattered was you. Tears welled up in Lana's eyes as the weight of his words hit her. She could feel her heart breaking all over again, but this time, there was something else. Something that wasn't just pain. It was the dawning realization that she still cared, still loved him, despite everything. Ethan stepped closer, closing the space between them, and gently cupped her face in his hands. I've spent so many years regretting what I did. I should have been there for you. I should have been the one to help you through it all. I didn't deserve your love, but I never stopped loving you. Lana closed her eyes for a moment, the warmth of his touch sending shivers down her spine. She wanted to pull away, to keep the walls she had built so carefully around her heart intact. But his words, his touch, shattered the walls, piece by piece. "I don't know if I can forgive you, Ethan," she whispered, her voice barely audible. "You left me when I needed you most. You let me fight the world on my own." "I know," Ethan said, his voice full of remorse. "I know, and I regret it every single day. But I'm here now. I'm here to ask for a chance, to ask you to let me be part of your life again." And Lana's chest tightened as she listened to him. Her heart was torn between the memories of their love, the pain of their separation, and the yearning for a future that no longer seemed impossible. She had built her life without him, fought for everything she had, and yet standing there, facing the man who had once meant the world to her, she felt something stir inside her, a hope, a glimmer of what could be. "I don't know if I can trust you again," Lana said, her voice thick with emotion. "I don't know if I can open my heart to you after everything that's happened." Ethan's eyes shone with sincerity. "I don't expect you to forget, Lana. I don't expect you to forgive me right away. All I'm asking for is a chance to prove that I can be the man you deserve. I've made my mistakes, but I'll spend the rest of my life making it right." For a long moment, Lana stood still, torn between the past and the future, between the love she still felt and the pain that would always be part of her. But deep down, she knew that she wasn't the same person who had walked away from him all those years ago. She had changed, grown stronger, and now she had the power to choose. Slowly, she took a deep breath and reached out, placing her hand on his. "I can't promise that everything will be the same," she said softly. "But I'm willing to try, Ethan. I'm willing to see what we can rebuild." A tear slid down Ethan's cheek as he held her hand, his grip tightening, as if afraid she would disappear. "Thank you, Lana. Thank you for giving me a chance." And in that moment, amidst the painful memories and the raw emotion between them, something shifted. The walls between them crumbled, and in their place, the possibility of a new beginning took root. A beginning born not out of perfection, but of forgiveness, love, and the shared hope that together they could build something stronger than what they had before. Lana stood in the middle of the bustling factory floor at Celestial Chocolates, the familiar scent of cocoa filling the air. The steady hum of the machines, the chatter of employees, and the rhythmic process of production all felt strangely calming to her now. It was here, amidst the chaos of the chocolate industry, that she had begun to rebuild her life. One step at a time, the contrast between this moment and the days when she had first arrived in New York felt almost surreal. Back then she had been broken, lost, and unsure of what the future would hold. Now she felt stronger than ever, her heart full of hope and determination. Her journey had been long, filled with pain and loss, but here she was, standing tall in the place she had once only dreamed of. Celestial Chocolates had become more than just a company to her. It had become a symbol of her transformation, of everything she had fought for and achieved. Each chocolate bar, each delicate truffle that passed through her hands now was a reminder of how far she had come. From the shattered woman who had been betrayed to the empowered businesswoman who had learned to forgive and rise above the darkness of her past. As she stood by the production line, she thought about how the chocolate industry had been her unexpected path to healing. In the sweetness of the cocoa and the smoothness of the chocolate, she had found a sense of purpose. The work wasn't easy, but it had given her something to hold on to when everything else seemed uncertain. In many ways, the chocolate itself became a metaphor for her own life, raw, bitter at times, but with the potential for something rich and sweet if nurtured properly. It wasn't just about the chocolates, though. It was about what she had learned along the way, the power of forgiveness, the strength to stand on her own, and the realization that she could create a future that wasn't defined by the past. The past had taught her to fight, but it had also taught her to let go. And letting go was the most difficult part, the part that had kept her bound for so long. But with each passing day, she felt herself becoming more and more free. "I never thought I could be this person," she thought to herself as she walked through the factory, her eyes scanning the employees as they worked, the hum of activity all around her. It was a strange kind of power, the kind that came not from force or domination, but from knowing she had earned her place in the world. She wasn't just someone who had thrived, she was someone who had thrived. Her phone buzzed in her pocket, pulling her from her thoughts. It was a message from Ethan. He had asked her to meet him after work to talk about the future. The future. The word still felt strange to her, something that had once seemed so distant, so unattainable. But now, it was hers to shape, hers to build with the foundation she had worked so hard to create. As she looked at the message, Lana felt a mixture of emotions. Her relationship with Ethan had never been simple. They had both been through so much, and the scars of their past still lingered between them. But something had shifted. She had shifted. Forgiveness had become a part of her healing process, not just for Ethan, but for herself. She had to let go of the anger, the resentment, to make room for the possibility of something new, something more real, more grounded. But can I truly forgive him? She asked herself, the question hanging in the air. It wasn't easy, and it wasn't something she could just answer overnight. But she knew that if she was to build a future, both for herself and for her son, she had to take this step. She couldn't keep living in the past, tethered to the mistakes and the pain that had shaped her for so long. Taking a deep breath, Lana turned away from the factory floor, walking toward the exit. She had come so far, and now it was time to face the next chapter of her life, one that was still unfolding, but one that was full of promise and hope. The drive to the cafe where she was meeting Ethan felt long, but in the quiet of the car, Lana allowed herself to reflect on how much she had changed. The woman who had walked into Celestial Chocolates all those months ago was no longer the same. She was someone new, someone who had learned the true meaning of strength. The road had been hard, but it had also been transformative. She had learned that life wasn't about the past. It was about what she chose to do with the present, and the future she could build for herself and her son. When she arrived, she saw Ethan standing outside, his hands in his pockets, his eyes scanning the crowd. He looked the same, but there was something different about him too. Something softer, more vulnerable. As their eyes met, Lana felt a flicker of something inside her that she wasn't ready to name, but that she knew was important. "What?" Ethan said softly as she approached, his voice laced with both uncertainty and hope. "Ethan," she replied, her voice steady but filled with the emotions she had been keeping at bay. She stopped in front of him, her eyes searching his, wondering if the man before her was the same person she had once loved, the same person who had left her heartbroken all those years ago. "Thank you for coming," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "I've spent so long thinking about what we lost, but I'm finally ready to move forward. I want to build a future with you if you'll let me." Lana took a deep breath, her heart racing. She wasn't sure what the future held for them, but in this moment she felt ready to take the next step. She had already built so much on her own, and maybe, just maybe, there was space for Ethan in her life again. "I'm not sure where we go from here," she said quietly, her gaze never leaving his, "but I'm willing to try. I'm willing to see what the future holds. For both of us." Ethan's face softened and a small smile tugged at his lips. "Then let's build that future, together." And in that moment, Lana realized that the future was no longer something to fear. It was something she could create, a future where love, forgiveness, and strength would guide her one step at a time. The sky was painted in hues of orange and pink as the sun began to dip below the horizon, casting a warm glow over the peaceful scene before them. Lana and Ethan stood side by side, their hands intertwined, watching the sunset from the porch of the house they had built together, both literally and figuratively. The moment felt surreal, a culmination of everything they had fought for, everything they had endured. For Lana, this was the moment she had longed for, but never thought she would reach. The past, with all its pain and heartache, seemed so distant now, almost as if it had happened to someone else. She had survived, thrived, and now, in Ethan's arms, she had found the kind of love she had once thought was impossible. It wasn't perfect, nothing ever is, but it was real and it was enough. She glanced over at Ethan, who had been silently watching the sunset as well. His gaze was soft, filled with affection and regret, as if he too were savoring the moment, knowing how much it meant for both of them. He had come to her with humility, with apologies, and most importantly, with a love that had stood the test of time. He had made mistakes, and so had she, but together they had found their way back to each other. "I never thought this day would come," Lana murmured, her voice a mix of disbelief and peace. "I never thought I could get here, get to this place where everything feels right." "Oh," Ethan squeezed her hand gently, his touch a reassurance. "You didn't just get here by chance, Lana. You fought for it. You fought for yourself, for us, for our future. You've always been stronger than you knew." Lana's heart fluttered at his words, and for a moment she was reminded of the woman she had been, the girl who had walked away from Savannah, heartbroken and alone. She had been afraid then, afraid of never being enough, afraid that her past would always define her. But now, standing here with Ethan, the woman who had emerged from that darkness was unrecognizable to the person she had once been. She had rebuilt her life on her own terms, not as a victim, but as a survivor, one who had learned to forgive and to love again. Her thoughts drifted briefly to Olivia, the woman who had once humiliated her, who had made her feel small and unworthy of love and acceptance. Yet now, even Olivia didn't seem as powerful as she once had. Lana had learned the value of forgiveness, not because Olivia deserved it, but because Lana deserved peace. It was a peace she had fought for, and now, in this quiet moment, she knew it was hers to claim. "I've learned so much about myself over the years," Lana continued, her voice quieter now, "about what really matters, what truly makes us strong." Ethan turned to face her, his expression serious but warm. "And what is that?" Lana smiled softly, her eyes meeting his. "Love, yes, but also forgiveness. The ability to move forward, to let go of what doesn't serve us, and the belief that we can shape our own futures, no matter what the past has been." Ethan's eyes shone with admiration, and he gently cupped her face in his hands. "I've always believed in you, Lana, but now I know I'm not just standing beside you. I'm walking this path with you. We're building this future together." As they stood there, basking in the warmth of the evening, Lana felt a sense of calm settle over her. She wasn't the same woman she had been when she left Savannah. She had walked through fire, and though she had been burned, she had emerged stronger. The woman she had become was resilient, determined, and capable of creating a life filled with love, success, and peace. A soft breeze blew through the trees, and Lana closed her eyes for a moment, letting the cool air wash over her. For the first time in years, she felt truly free. free from the weight of her past, free from the judgment of others, and free to embrace the future that awaited her. She opened her eyes again and looked at Ethan, who was now smiling at her with an expression that spoke volumes, an expression that conveyed the depth of his love, his gratitude, and his hope for the future. Together they had overcome everything, and together they would face whatever challenges lay ahead, but in that moment, was the last rays of sunlight faded into the night, it was enough to simply be with him, to be here in this moment of peace. "I love you," she whispered, her voice filled with the sincerity of everything she had learned. "I love you too," Ethan replied, his voice thick with emotion. And as they stood there, hand in hand, watching the sunset slip away and the stars begin to emerge, Lana realized that this was her happy ending. It wasn't one of perfect resolutions or without pain, but it was a happy ending nonetheless. It was a life built on forgiveness, love, and the strength to create a new beginning, a life that was finally her own. For the first time in a long time, Lana felt at peace. The journey had been long, but it had led her to exactly where she needed to be, by Ethan's side, ready to build the future they both deserved.